Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with 1,500 subscribers. I just want to take a moment to thank you all for subscribing, for commenting, for watching the videos, for sending me your decks. I've been having a lot of fun and the support you've shown me really means a lot. So I'm hoping we'll keep going and we'll look at more decks and we'll build more strange, silly kind of things to beat our friends with, and I'm just excited. Right now, we're looking at a donation deck of the week. This is Vish from Jose. Jose wants the deck to work around a life drain kind of theme, and that's generally how it is right now, which is really good. And the main thing that they want me to work on is the mana curve and the mana base, because Vish is a 7-drop. They only have one restriction. They didn't want to go into infinite combos, which is very easy to avoid, so I'm happy to hear that. Vish was my first commander back when the commander precons came out. Don't ask me how long ago that was. I don't want to know. But my first commander deck was particularly bad. It was definitely life gain themed without any life gain payoffs. You know, just wanted to have hundreds and hundreds of health, as many new players like to do. But this is a much better deck, and I'm very excited to go into it. So without further ado, let's look at Vish and what they do, and what they can do for this deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Vish Blood Arbiter, and what are they doing here in our Life Drain deck? Well, Vish is a 7-mana legendary vampire. He's a 5/5 flying lifelink in both white and black, and they have two abilities. The first one is sacrifice a creature, put X +1/+1 counters on Vish where X is the creature's power, and the second ability is to remove all +1/+1 counters from Vish Target creature gets -1/-1 for each counter removed this way. So Vish is kind of a late game beater and sack outlet, and technically removal. Generally, what Vish allows you to do is trade your smaller creatures for their bigger creatures, or I'm not going to say the other way around. I'm going to say you can also trade your smaller creatures for their smaller creatures. What's kind of important about Vish is Vish doesn't allow you to select how many counters you remove. You remove the whole bunch every single time. So it's better to grow Vish in small increments and remove creatures that way, rather than, you know, sacrifice a 10/10, make Vish a 15/15, and then have to remove all those counters to kill, I don't know, like a small commander, as that's a 3/3. You don't really want to do that, but if there's like a board clear or something happening, it could, or removal, that could be useful. Vish other main kind of perk is that he is a very big beater. It's very easy to make Vish into what I would say like lethal commander range of being 21, depending on the kind of build you have, but for most decks, I think making him into like a 12/12 is reasonable. That's 2 attacks to kill a player, but it's also a giant swing of life when you have 12/12 lifelink, right? In terms of the theme of the deck, Vish is more kind of a let's say a poster boy for the deck, and not very much so involved in any combos or involved very much so in the life drain. It's more like this is a vampire themed deck and Vish is there to support us, which I am a very big fan of. Looking at the deck proper, I like it quite a bit. There's a few things I want to touch on, but as always, we'll see that we have 36 lands, which when it comes to a deck that has a 7-mana commander, we could probably go up to 37, 38 without much problems. But I think the bigger thing about the mana is the mana curve here. We can see that we go, you know, we've got about 10 spells in 1 mana, and then 2, 3, and 4 mana all have about 15 spells as well. Then we drop off to 2 for 5, 5 for 6, and 1 for 7, which is of course Vish. This is kind of like a plateau setup, which I'm not very much a big fan of, especially where 3 and 4 have so many cards in them, making our mana basically a third of our deck is not playable, you know, for the first few turns, and even then, the amount of mana required to double spell with these spells is a lot, right? If you think about 3 and 4 mana spells, you need either 6, 7, or 8 total mana to double spell those spells, which is hard because a lot of these spells are really strong and you do want to cast them. So I think for me, one of the big things I want to kind of poke at in this deck is those 3 and 4 mana spells. Which ones are weaker than others, which ones can be cut, and which ones can be replaced with lower mana cards. Now when it comes to additions, I have a bunch of low mana cards that function in that kind of drain capacity. I've got some payoffs for the draining, and I also have a little bit of mana help. So with that, let's get into like looking at those 3 and 4 mana spells and see what we can do. So we can see here we've got all of these spells, and I'm going to go in them from top to bottom. Coffin Queen is a 3 mana repeatable, somewhat reanimation creature. Coffin Queen is really cool. I love the art on Coffin Queen, but unfortunately, this is a very slow reanimation kind of setup. I'd much rather kind of a one-shot reanimation spell such as Reanimate, which I believe we are already playing. Yeah, we're already playing Reanimate. We're already playing as well. Oh, we're not playing Animate Dead. So generally, I think I would prefer Animate Dead to being in these kind of decks. I like the idea of repeated reanimation. I do. But Coffin Queen isn't actually repeated reanimation. The way that Coffin Queen works is that you basically keep her tapped to reanimate one card, and then when you untap her, that card evaporates. And that's cool, which means you can, keep grabbing new creatures, or you can keep one big creature, but it's actually just kind of a liability, because Coffin Queen, if she is removed for any reason, for that, you also lose the creature, and that creature gets exiled. It doesn't just go back to the graveyard, unlike some other repeatable reanimation, which I find to be a little clunky. That, in addition to the fact that she's 3 to play, 3 to activate, I think makes her a particularly weak card. Denethor, I think, works a lot better in this deck, both in terms of the creation of the tokens and a bit of a mana outlet for the deck, so I don't mind that as much. I will say it is still generally kind of a clunky creature at 3 mana, and then once again a mana sacrifice outlet, so this is one like a mana outlet for you, and I don't love that. A mana sink, that's the word. I don't love a mana sink that starts at 2, but this is much more in theme, so I think I am gonna be a little kinder to it. That being said, Comball is a perfect card that I rarely, see downsides to. I know at 3 mana as a 2/3 that can't really attack a lot because you don't want to lose them. They can seem clunky, but the sheer amount of life Comball takes in a turn cycle, I'll just say, is really amazing. I think easily Comball can steal 6 health total, which is like 2 lightning helixes, which I think is rather good. And if you keep track of Comball over a game, I think you'll be very, very impressed. If people are playing black-white mid-range, black-white punish, I think you should really play Comball if you can, because it is a very, very strong card. Teysa is also very interesting here because, and this might be more of a theme, this is, once again, kind of a mana sink of a creature, but a little backwards. See, Teysa works really well with our main life drain plan. Life draining is really easy to do across multiple opponents, either like an aristocrat effect, or like Zulaport Cutthroat, or any kind of life drain spell, or like Comball, as we just saw, will drain your opponents equally, and all of a sudden you will trigger Teysa 3 times, getting 3 clues onto the battlefield. I really like Teysa Opulent Oligarch for this, but here's the thing, this deck can't really use the artifacts in any meaningful way outside of sacrificing them as intended as clues, which I'm not gonna lie is not bad, especially the way clues works allows Teysa's second ability to trigger over 3 turns, because you don't need to crack all the clues on your turn or on the end step. You can slowly crack them, generating 1/1 Black Spirit tokens, which, works with the whole sacrifice theme. I like that. But even then, once again, we have that mana sink where we have all of this mana that we want to be putting into all of these cards. And I don't know if this is the best use of that mana sink. We can't really do crazy amount of things with her. The fact that she has Death Touch doesn't really do a lot for us. So for me, I'm willing to cut her out of the deck pretty easily. Veto is very strong. Thorn of the Dusk Rose as a very strong, Sanguine Bond kind of spell, you're going to be very, very happy. The lifelink is nice. No notes, excellent. Toxic Deluge, excellent. Generous Gift is where we're getting to the point that I'm starting to feel that maybe this is too much. I'm a really big fan of Generous Gift and also Stroke of Midnight, but at this point with this number of 3 mana spells, I think we're kind of pushing it, and I think maybe we'd be better off just not playing this and playing something else. For example, our 2 mana kind of removal spells such as Vanishing Verse, or we have Despark here, which I think is also very strong, and just kind of accepting the fact we won't be able to hit everything. Even something like Utter End might be a little better, but then again, 4 mana is our other slot that has a lot of cards, and I think I'd be down to kind of remove it. Sudden Spoiling, on the other hand, I think definitely does not belong here. I understand the ceiling of this card is amazing. It's a very, very fun card when you are deck building, and it's always kind of lackluster when you are deck playing, in my opinion. The ability is just very, very niche, and even then, I think there's just going to be moments that it just operates as a fog, and a 3 mana fog is just not particularly good enough. Teferi's Protection. This is another one, and we're going to get to this after I finish this 3 and 4 segment. There is a bit of a power level imbalance in this deck, and Teferi's Protection is one of those cards that fits into that slot. This is an incredibly powerful card that I don't think needs to be in this deck, because I think the deck is fine enough, you know, creating a life total that's impossible to take out in one turn outside of incredibly strong opponents where Teferi's Protection is not really going to do much. All it's going to do is a fog, and next turn cycle you're going to lose. So with this, I just don't think we need this kind of flash fog effect. We have another fog effect, which I think is already better. This Teferi's Protection is just going to be clunky, I think. So at this point, I'm saying to take it out, but let's revisit that in the power level discussion. Going to artifacts, Ashnod's Altar is strong, but I think doesn't really belong here because we just do not have enough means to create enough creatures regularly to really benefit from this. And though it is really nice with Vishkal and a number of other creatures that I've pointed out that have colorless mana sinks, I still don't think it's good enough. There is a cute interaction between the Ashnod's Altar and the Teysa, where it creates a 1/1 when you sacrifice a clue, which allows you to use that mana to sacrifice a clue to create another 1/1, but you can't repeat this because of how Teysa works, so you have to kind of do it intermittently in between turns, and when you do that, you need to already have a creature to set. Like, it's a lot of loops for not a really good payoff, because each cycle all it does is draw you a card and create a 1/1. For free, yeah, but by sacrificing a creature, and I don't know if that's really doing what you want it to do. So Ashnod's Altar feels clunkier here. In a much higher concentration of tokens, I would be much more of a fan. And with that in mind, I would be asking why Skull Clamp isn't here. If Skull Clamp, I guess that's a really good test. If Skull Clamp isn't in your deck, Ashnod's Altar probably doesn't belong in your deck. They're very comparable cards, and though there might be an argument that Skull Clamp is better with X1s and Ashnod's Altar is better with just anything, I don't think that's much of a difference. I think if you want one, you generally want the other. Orzhov Cluestone is too much mana for a mana rock. 3 mana for a mana rock in a 2-color deck is just clunky. We don't want this, so I think that's a very, very easy cut as well. Sword of Feast and Famine is a great card, but in a deck that only has 24 creatures, only a few tutors, I don't know if this is functionally exactly what I want here. I do respect the fact that it allows us to double spell a lot easier, but Sword of Feast and Famine notably does not allow us to get to 7 mana reasonably. Like, we can't use this to get Vishkal out early, right? If we play this on turn 3, turn 4, equip it, attack, we still only get 4 mana back on the trigger, and therefore we are not hitting that 7 mana that allows us to summon Vishkal. So this is a card I really, really like. It's very, very strong. I don't particularly think this is the deck that it belongs in and can be cut or moved into a different deck. Looking at our last 3 enchantments, Bastion of Remembrance works with our life drain and aristocrat theme. Black Market Connection works with the life that we're paying, and Phyrexian Arena as well. Very much so a big fan. I think you could get away with playing Necropotence if you wanted, or Necrodominance. They would both fit into the deck rather well, but at this moment, I think these are fine. Let's quickly go through the 4 drops. Beza, the Bounding Spring, is not really where we want to be. It's got a lot of catch-up mechanic to it, and I don't know if this is necessarily like a deck that wants this catch-up mechanic. Not only are we particularly good at generating mana, generating creatures, we're good at generating life, we're good at generating cards. The only thing we can't generate is lands, and all Beza gives us is a treasure token, unlike a lot of the other white catch-up mechanics that puts a land onto the battlefield. All that to say, I think sometimes this creature is just a 4/5 for 4, making it not particularly good and an easy cut. Elenda, the Dusk Rose, is a very good card. I think this operates in more of a vampire token style or just vampire kindred version of this deck. I do recognize the power it represents when you have a bunch of creatures out, a sack outlet like Vishcal, and a, like, let's say a Blood Artist effect. I do recognize that Elenda is very good there. It doubles all of those triggers. Basically, you sacrifice 6 creatures, sacrifice Elenda. Elenda generates 7 creatures, and then you sack them all again to basically go from 6 sacrifices to 8 total sacrifice. 8 plus, so like 14 sacrifices, which is good and very, very strong when you have the means to take advantage of it. But it also makes it somewhat win more, right? Because of that, you already need everything out. So Elenda sometimes will come out as a 1/1 lifelink, and that's all she'll ever be. So in a deck like this, without more support for her, I don't think this is really where we want to be, and she's an easy cut. As a side note, I do notice right now that we have 101 cards. I didn't notice that before. For players who don't know, you're not allowed to have 101 cards. Commander is very specific that you have to have 100 cards. So we'll make a cut here somewhere. One of these cuts, just don't put a different card in. Falkenrath Noble works really well here. It is a Blood Artist effect in the sense that it is like Blood Artist and only targets one player at a time. But that being said, it functions in the theme in multiple ways, and I have no problem with that. Lossarnarch, I can never pronounce that. This Lossarnarch Captain that generates humans every upkeep. I think this is fine. This is obviously themed for a human deck where it can do a lot of damage by playing a bunch of humans and therefore tapping a bunch of your opponent's creatures down, allowing for very, very strong attacks. And this is just not that deck. I think this should belong in the other token deck that Jose was talking about. So here, I think it's going to be clunky. I'm sure, let's take a quick look how many humans we have. Go into subtype. Going down to humans, we can see we have 10 humans. That's not enough to reliably trigger this creature. And even more so, her once a turn kind of setup is already not good enough in my opinion and can be cut. Luminous Broodmoth, once again, this is somewhat of a doubler coming from our commander when we have, not from our commander, sorry, from much like Elenda coming in when we have a large army that we can sacrifice and return all these creatures with fly. However, this one I think is actually worse than Elenda because notably, one, a lot of our creatures already have flying, including our commander, which cannot get this trigger. And two, a lot of the things we sacrifice are tokens, and tokens cannot return because once they go to the graveyard, they cease to exist. So Luminous Broodmoth, though, a fun card that I do really like, and very, very beautiful, very much so Duskmourn themed, though it is in Ikoria, is not a card that can be played here, and therefore I would cut it pretty easily. Mangara, this is a card, every time I see Mangara, I say, is Mangara the Diplomat a good card? I had someone comment not long ago saying that they found a lot of success with Mangara. I'm still highly suspicious, right? There's two things that needs to happen for Mangara to do anything, right? Your opponents need to double cast, which I think is reasonable to get a card every few turns, depending on power level, which once again, we'll get back to that power level talk. But that first ability when opponents attack you with creatures, if two or more of those creatures are attacking you or planeswalkers you control. Your opponents are disincentivized to attack you because of your massive life total to begin with. I know that's a kind of a strange thing to say, and especially in certain pods, especially lower level pods, people tend to go, who has the highest health, I'll attack them. But as the deck grows in power and your pod grows to power, players are just not interested in doing 6 damage to the opponent with 80 life. They're much more interested in destroying that player's creatures and setting up huge life swings. And with that in mind, Mangara doesn't really stop a few pokes in of 6, 8, 12 damage. And if an opponent has a 12-12 to begin with, it won't trigger Mangara anyways, and therefore you're just getting attacked with a 12-12. I think much more likely what happens is you play Mangara and nobody attacks to you until they have like 10 10-10s, and they'll attack you with them, not minding you drawing a card and you having to deal with 100 damage going your way. So I'm still going to be adamant that I do not like this card. I do not think it's particularly good. And outside of certain like things you can do to force this trigger to happen, which this deck doesn't have, I don't think it's going to be something you should keep, and I think it would be an easy cut here. Merc with Bats I really like with the token theme. It's very nice. I also very much so like this art. Rock's Faithbender is a card I also very much don't like here because doubling your life gain I think is not really doing much because, well, frankly, the difference between 100 life and 200 life doesn't mean much if you're not triggering any abilities on this. I think it's pretty well known at this point. I say it a lot, but I'm going to say it again. Life gain doesn't do anything. Life gain triggering something does something. And here, I am going to add some triggers for this, but they won't work particularly well here. Rock's Faithbender, I think, is an easy cut, but is thematically relevant, and so I'm not going to say completely remove it. I think it's fine to stay around. On the other hand, Wave of Rats, I don't quite understand why this is here. I guess you can repeatedly sacrifice it to your commander while blitzing it every turn, but this is a 4 mana 4/2 or a 5 mana 4/2, and that draws you a card at least. I don't know. This is a very clunky engine. This is a draw engine that's easily kind of defeated by all your other draw engines, and I just don't like it. I just don't think it belongs here. It's a cool card, don't get me wrong, but not here. Not at the mana cost it's at. You have much better draw engines, you have much better things to do, and you could get better recursable creatures like Bloodghast, for example, that you already have to constantly put counters on your commanders. So overall, Wave of Rats feels particularly bad. Ritual of the Machine is cute. I don't know to what degree I like it, but a mono black take control of a creature. They're rare to find. They do exist, but they are rare to find, and therefore that at 4 mana, I'm not gonna harp on it too much. I think this is a cute card. It really does look like he's giving that robot flowers. I know he's not, but my headcanon is the art here is he's romancing the robot, so that's important to me. Artifacts. Paradise Plume, 4 mana for a mana rock is too much, even with the fact that it'll gain you life. I think this is just a bad card and very easy to cut. Thran Dynamo is an interesting one here because 4 mana to tap for 3 is very, very powerful, but I still don't think it belongs here. Why do I say that? Well, let's think about this kind of objectively. What does this ramp us into? And you might say, well, you know, Vish Kal, very obviously Vish Kal. And I say, okay, you're right. What else? And objectively, nothing really. We have a handful of 6 mana cards, and then we have 2 5 mana cards. So outside of Vish Kal, we're not really ramping into much. We might be ramping into that 6 mana card, but we're not that far from just playing the 6 mana card. So I feel this level of ramp is unneeded. I'm much more interested in going from 2 to 4 using, you know, Orzhov Signets, using Talisman, cards like that, in order to get us there. Felwar Storms, Arcane Signets. I like those a lot more. I'm not really interested in the Thran Dynamo getting us there, so I think that's an easy cut. Felidar Retreat I think is cute. Once again, I don't know to what degree I really like this here. This is a landfall card and a bit of a token card, so it's quasi helpful here, but at the same time, I don't know to what degree I love it. I do really like this +1/+1 counter on our commander. Getting Vigilance on our commander, that is really nice, but once again, 4 mana seems a lot for this, and I'd rather cut. I'd rather have this be like an equipment that has similar things if we want that on our commander. Grave Pact, incredibly strong here, I love it. Smothering Tide, incredibly strong here, I love it. And Starlight Spectacular, I think this is good. I didn't realize this was a non-acorn card. Okay, let's read this because I don't know if a lot of people know this. At the beginning of combat, choose creatures you control one at a time until each creature you control has been chosen. Each of those creatures get +1/+1 for each creature chosen before it. Places everyone, the first creature gets 0/0. So basically you use this as a very, very strong anthem as long as you have enough creatures. This is interesting. I think I like this in a more dedicated token deck, but I think this is fine here because with at least 4 creatures, your Vish gets +5/+5. And that's generally how you want to use this effect. You want to put all your small tokens that don't have any form of evasion in the front, count them all, and then start giving the creatures that have evasion, you know, the higher bonuses so you can guarantee the hits on your opponents. So I do like that. I think I'm going to keep this. Okay, before we go into additions, I want to talk about the power level situation. If you yourself as the viewer or the deck builder have opened the deck already and are looking through it, you might notice a bit of, let's say, whiplash between the power level of certain cards. For example, as mentioned before, we have Beza the Bounding Spring, but we also have Esper Sentinel, right? We have Coffin Queen, but we also have Demonic Tutor. Sorry, not Vampiric Tutor. That's in the side as an option. This we have, I should also point out, we have cards like Bolas's Citadel and we have Wound Reflection, cards that are both 6 mana but very, very different in power level. Smothering Tithe is here, and so is, you get the picture, Luminous Broodmoth. So with this in mind, I think the deck is at a situation where it needs to decide if it wants to be weaker or stronger. And I've been kind of 2 minds of this. A lot of the cards I've pointed out that I'd like to take out are weaker for sure, but I don't want to take them out just because they're weaker cards to raise the power level. I want to take them out because they're clunky cards. You can easily replace them with like relatively similar power level cards at lower mana, which is what I'm going to suggest, without, you know, making the deck too powerful. But if you are finding this deck is having a hard time matching decks of its power level, it might be better to reduce its power level, remove the Esper Sentinels, remove the Tutors, that kind of move, remove the Smothering Tide, reduce the power level, and then play against decks of that power level, and I think it'll be more successful. Otherwise, you might find yourself having to increase the power level, and you might have to play infinite combos. The combo here was Mikaeus the Unhallowed. They were saying, Jose was saying they didn't want to play the Mike and Trike combo, but like, I personally think Mike and Trike is incredibly fair here if you were trying to get to that power level. So these are things to think about, and things to think about whenever you build the deck of what the ideal power level of the deck should be competing against. We have a hard time, you know, looking at our commander decks and being objective about what that power level is. This is not something I'm just going to say, hey, it's a skill issue. I have that problem too. When we build our decks, we're just kind of tunnel visioned into them, but it's much easier to gauge the power level of other people's deck, even hypothetically. So if I were to say, how would you feel sitting this deck across from someone who is playing decks cards at the power level of Esper Sentinel, Smothering Tide, you know, I already have forgotten the other cards. Demonic Tutor, Toxic Deluge, Teferi's, the Teferi's, my goodness, where are we? Teferi's Protection. Thank you. I think I'm still vacation brained a little bit. So you're playing against these decks how would you feel playing against a deck with that power level of Esper Sentinel, Demonic Tutor, Teferi's Protection, all those kind of things? Would you feel like you would be fond of that, or would you ask your opponents to play weaker decks? And if your answer is yeah, those decks might be too strong for this deck, then I think you should take a look at this deck and see what you can do to reduce the power level. Okay, spiel over. Let's look at the additions that I have to say. I want to start by just a card that I think the fun card I want to put it in, and it's Dark Confidant. You're gaining a lot of life, so Dark Confidant is particularly good at doing something with that life, But as I try to point out a lot, Dark Confidant is $5. Dark Confidant is just very, very strong, and I think if you are willing to budget a few dollars into commander decks, which most players are, obviously this deck already has done that, Dark Confidant is just a very, very easy inclusion. And I would say that outside of life gain decks. Here, it's even better, so I think this is the first edition for sure. Then something out of your sideboard is Lotho. I think Lotho is very good at generating the mana you're looking for to do things, and also, once again, thematically a card that works well with the life that you are gaining to lose it for treasure tokens. So big fan of Lotho. I think I would want to add that here. One more card for in terms of mana is Black Market. I think this deck could very, very much so benefit from Black Market. Usually I'm not keen on dropping 5 mana cards into decks, but your deck has very few 5 mana cards, so we can benefit from putting this in there. I think with your sacrifice sub-theme, with the removal that you have, Black Market can get to a very, very high charge count very easily, and with that in mind, you can take advantage of that mana quickly. Do note that it is just black mana, and you do have enough white mana that it's not going to just catapult you into the end game perfectly, but I still think there's something of value here, especially if you are using it in tandem of heavy black cards, such as, I don't know, Necropotence or the Grave Pact. Thank you. All right, looking into a few more thematic cards that I wanted to put in. I wanted to put in a little more drain. You were saying that the deck is drain based, and most of our drain comes from kind of aristocrat mechanics. And I'm generally a huge fan of aristocrats. Feel free to look through my channel for, you know, what was it, the tier list of the best aristocrat commanders. I really liked making that video, but for here, I didn't want to put more aristocrat cards in because I wanted the theme to stick to drain. So first one here is Creeping Bloodsucker. That's on your upkeep. You drain 3 total life from all of your opponents, which is really, really nice. And when you drop Creeping Bloodsucker and leave them around, you're going to very much so benefit over 2 or 3 turns to drain more life than you would expect. Likewise, Bloodseeker is another vampire that just came out of the Duskmourn Commander. It's a Commander card. I thought it was just from the main set, but a very, very cheap card that says whenever a creature you're... Oh, it's a reprint. My goodness. I was thinking, I'm so used to this card having this art. I was like, why would they print a common card? But Bloodseeker is not a drain, but a vampire that deals a little bit of damage to your opponents for every time they play a creature. This art, 1, is really, really cool, but 2, I kind of like how this mechanically punishes your opponents for playing a lot of little creatures, which will help you get into that your drains and your aristocrat effects will just have a little more oomph behind them because of just playing how much incidental damage they'll be taking. Kind of on the same vein, Sanctum of the Stone Fangs. I just want to throw this in here. I know it's not the strongest thing as the only shrine, but if you play this card, it will drain 1 life from each of your opponents every turn. And this will be very good with the next few cards that we look at, as that life gain will trigger things, but it's also not a creature unlike the first 2, which makes it harder to deal with. And over turn after turn, this will add up quite a bit for its lower mana cost. So I do like this here, especially if you lower the power level of the deck, but I do recognize it is one of the weaker cards. Another card I like to add is Tithing Blade, both in its theme because it is a very good vampire themed card with very gruesome art if you really pay attention. I don't even think you really need to pay attention, that's just horrifying. And on the backside, it is a very good drain ability. Are you sticking your hand into that mouth as well? This is a very, very painful card to look at. On the backside, it is another one of these drain cards, but on the front side, being a card that is forcing each of your opponents to sacrifice a card is very, very good. I think this is a particularly strong card, just in general, and I think more decks should run it, but here I think it's just thematically good, so I think it should be there for sure. Now, what are we doing with all this drainage? Indulging Patrician here, I really like furthering this theme of life drain in Vampire. This says, at the beginning of your end step, if you gain 3 or more life, each opponent loses 3 life. So this is the weaker version of this kind of ability, but I still think it's rather good. Once again, at the power level this deck is, I think this is fine to play, and then every turn cycle you're going to get another 3 damage to each of your opponents, and I really, really like that. But if we want this to be a little stronger, Marauding Blight Priest will do the same thing, where whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So this will just trigger way, way more often for more damage, but it probably doesn't hurt to play both. I think both of these cards are particularly strong when you are doing a life gain deck, but being in vampire themed, being creatures that can attack, I think, and with the previous one having lifelink as well, I think is particularly strong. So I think these are easy additions, and the final version and the final card with this kind of effect would be Enduring Tenacity. Enduring Tenacity is very much so the stronger version of Sanguine Bond, like, right? There's no questioning this. It comes in as a creature, it costs 1 less, it has the same text, but when Enduring Tenacity dies, it will return to the battlefield as an enchantment and not a creature, so it gets to stay around twice. I think that's really, really good, and generally much more functional than Sanguine Bond. Granted, you can still play Sanguine Bond, but, you know, Veto and Enduring Tenacity versus like Veto and Sanguine Bond is it's much stronger to play this card. Also, the side art of this card is really, really cute if you are a fan of it. That being said, it is much, much more expensive. I prefer regular art. And that's it for Vish Cal. I think what I want to say is there's a lot to this deck that I like. There's a lot that I could go further on. There's a number of cards in this sideboard that can go main board. For example, I'm looking at Blind Obedience here, which is a really nice addition. I'm looking at other cards at the higher mana cost like Kirk that can work really, really well with our life gain theme. But at the moment, the deck is kind of in a phase that it needs to kind of pick what power level it wants to be and what direction it wants to go in. So I'm actually kind of keen to take a second look at the deck if Jose wants to send it again, because I think there's a lot we can do with it, but we just need to decide what we are doing. If we are powering up this deck, there is a very, very clear direction to go into. But if we're powering down this deck, there's a lot of fun, strange things we can do, right? We can make this into a very, very strong Vampire Kindred Drain deck that I think would be really fun to play. That isn't a deck that plays cards like Black Market Connections or sides in Vampiric Tutor. I hope this video was helpful to you. Thank you so much, Jose, for supporting the channel. I look forward to hopefully another version of the deck. All right, good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.